So it starts with Nick Champion, and we're looking at about 100,000 years to 3000 BCE. Nick Champion has done amazing research, and like the UAC says, he takes us back to a world of magic and mystery. It examines the origin of astrology in both the prehistoric and ancient worlds, in rock art and lunar calendars, and considers resulting theories in nature and practice in modern world. He tangles with the question, is it a result of desire of religious engagement with the sky, or the need for scientific explanation of natural cycles? The second area that I'll touch is Mesopotamia, which is basically 5000 BCE to 1000 BCE. There's a wonderful talk by Maria Mateus on basically how the Mesopotamians created our current astrological house system. It's uncanny and way too similar to be just a coincidence. She also was talking about how they have no differential between cause and effect, that their time was eternally happening and was not a separate phenomenon. It was basically alchemy and astrology. They thought that way. Think Aborigines' concept of time, how it is completely foreign to us in this age. They also spoke phonetically, so when they said air and air, they inferred jokes to it. So I have an error, and the air outside, then the joke would be made through the reference. So the air of my error is because it's an error of reality, kind of like living in an illusion, something akin to that. So keep in mind this as we go back to Maria Mateus. She's doing an Epic of Gilgamesh as the foundation of the current house system. Each part of the Epic in Gilgamesh is in accordance to a house. There are 12 different houses in astrology, and like Gilgamesh, our house system is broken into two parts. The topper part and the external. The topper part is the external experience, and the bottom part is the internal experience. The lower half, 1 to 6, is the happier tales of Gilgamesh, and the top part is the sadder parts. And the transfer towards immortality, which is basically the 12th house coming to the first, the unraveling of your identity and your personal myth towards a new beginning. Then we go to China, which is basically 1000 BCE to now, and they don't understand the same methodologies as their elders. I'm fairly sure of that. I can explain that later on. There is a trading and germination going on during this period. You see this through Buddhism and how Hindu practices germinated into Taoism, and vice versa. Keywords like breathing begin to morph together due to improper translation and excitement of new techniques. We see this in modern day yoga. We see this going from China to Japan, from Korea to Japan, from India to Persia. It's hard to pinpoint exact times that the germination happened, but it did. We have a lot of Vedic astrologers who I'm sure could expunge a little bit more on the Indian side of it. I'm a little weak here, honestly, but Persia then is the next one, and this is where we get the pinpoint of it. This is 10,000 BCE to 600 BC. Currently, I don't think there's many Persian practicing astrologers, or if there are, I don't know of any. But since they're becoming translated to Western astrologers, we're getting more of this information. Benjamin Dykes is doing amazing research into this, and basically he's talking about Arab lots on Persian astrologers and translating them into English, many for the first time. And others that have been translated wrong because they didn't understand the language and thought it was kind of gobbledygook, or they didn't like the translations because of their biases against pseudoscience. But basically, this is where I think is a link between Western and Eastern astrology, as it has aspects of both of it in it. We'll talk about that when I talk about astrology and alchemy. Then we have Hellenistic astrology, which is basically 400 BC to 600 AD. And this was trading through the Silk Roads. This is kind of... and it's kind of hard to pinpoint also. The forefront researcher was Chris Brennan and his Denver posse. Doug Noblehorse is also doing some interesting work in the lots, and they're bridging the gaps between Persian astrology and Hellenistic astrology coming through the early Greeks, who most likely learned it from the Persians and the Egyptians. Now we have Deborah Holding, which basically goes 680 to 1900. She does an amazing job bridging the time and doing impeccable research into key astrologers like Alan Leo and others. She takes horary astrology, which is basically questioning questions based through astrology, through large patches of history. She does skyscript.com, which is amazing. Then we have the Renaissance Revival, which is basically 1400 to 1800. This is when the church is decimating everything, and so you get astrology going into Kabbalah and Tarot, and we get more of alchemy, basically where you're hiding the system in plain sight so that it wasn't burned. Stephen Vanel does amazing work into this. Then we have astrology that comes to America, where Christopher Renstrom is doing amazing research, and then this is basically, the 1700s, maybe 1780s to 1900s. Then we have the modern revival, which is basically 1970s to current. We have the psychological astrologies, including Liz Green and Dane Ridgard. And then we have the newly formed Uranian astrology, which is carried on by Gary Christensen. Okay, so that's basically the large swap. Now we have combining alchemy and astrology through this timeline with the assumption that they were the same concept on the Mesopotamians. We see this mirrored through the combination of Vedic astrology, which is more akin to alchemy, and the Hellenistic tradition, which is more similar to modern astrology. The combination comes through Benjamin Dyke's research into Persian astrology, particularly his works on lots, as the part of fortune and the part of spirit. He calls them lots. And basically they work like ascendants. Each get their own 30-degree window, and begin to split 30 degrees into the chart. When you get 90 lots or 180 lots, which they had back then, you start doing what Vedics do when they break up the house into 2 to 18 sections. The Persians also have lords and rulers that do not move and are based on fixed degrees on the chart. They are constant. Vedics have lords and rulers. They call them different names, but they have fixed rulers that do not move also. There's this amazing lady, Anne Beaverdorf, Stariel.com, who is a Vedic astrologer who is combining a lot of techniques in a very similar way. Then we also have the Mayan Americas as a side note. And they basically have the same concept as Indian astrologers. Lots of them do that. Probably going to go over by 5 minutes, sorry. And then we also have African astrologers, and then we have pagan astrologers like Celtic astrology. And I'll tie that into it also, but that's not for here. Now, we're combining alchemy and astrology through the timeline. Oh, I already said it. Then we have modern research, which is amazing, and we have the Gators, who are, we'll talk about that. They're an astrological research group, and then we have modern techniques, the Uranian School of Astrology, who, using their trans-Neptunian planets, mapped out the Kepler belt before even modern science knew about it, which is basically the outer ring of Pluto where lots of planets come flowing in there. They found that before. The Gators are an astrological research group. One of the Gators, Alfie Lavoie, lived in Connecticut, and this was during the 1970s. And during that time, astrologers and psychologists were both being arrested. Alfie got arrested 4 times in 1970 for practicing occult information. Now, psychologists were smart, basically the Jungian and Freudian psychologists, and they basically used their data to validate themselves, creating such advanced tools as the Rorschach and MMPI. The MMPI, to my knowledge, is a test like 500 questions where you individually are referenced to a huge pool, which is always growing, of other candidates and how they filled out the MMPI. So basically, bipolar people fill it out similarly, along with schizophrenic and blah, blah, blah. Basically, there's sets of 15 to 40 things that they're referencing. And if you have these 15 to 40 things, you're 100% more likely than the average person to be bipolar or schizophrenic. This is exactly what the Gators are doing. They are inferencing 15 to 100 things like a moon square Mars, sun sextile ascendant, and such and such. And if you have 15 of them, you are 100% more likely to be a millionaire, a stripper, an artist, a killer, or what have you. They're doing actual data. And their people load is quite small currently. They have a normal base of around 5,000 people. Their baseline is the top 1%, so you can keep that in mind too. Top 1% of artists and musicians. This is also a way to test theories and practices of astrologers. It is our checks and balance system. It's really cool. The world is becoming smaller, and through the shrinking of nations and boundaries, we begin to understand our primal and basic roots. Astrology and alchemy is built into us, and I aim to prove that. New technology makes visiting the past easier, and technological advances begin to come from the past as rocket fuel to build our future. Lots of scientists forget their DNA and their roots. They came from astrologers and alchemists. We are now free souls who will reinvigorate and shake up the dying dragon that's eating its own tail. We will teach the dragon to fly again. And I'll leave you with a quote from Christopher Wrench from Unruling Planets. The unwritten rule of astrology is people begin to form constellations through their collective gravity. They come together for specific reasons. Carl Jung called them synchronicities, but we have the audacity and the ability to call it for what it actually is, astrology.